Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. You remember Monopoly. It's great to have hotels on Boardwalk and Park Place. Well, we're entering into big Monopoly. Stacy.
Hey, Max, something that we predicted quite a few years ago is once again coming true, and that is that, as the Thucydides trap happened and as China continues to rise in power, that what happens with empires is they tend to influence the behavior of many other countries around the world. And we're seeing a similar story happening today. I believe this is my theory about what's happening in the United States. And that's essentially, we don't have ghost cities like they do in China, but we have ghost homes. And that is because of a similar situation of too much credit, not a great environment for investment opportunities for ordinary people. And it's a great way to leverage your way up to vast, tens of thousands of dollars every year on house price gains. So we're seeing something happen over the past year, the explosive surge of mortgages for second homes, housing bubble math. No housing market can produce enough homes when homes are massively used as vacant investment speculations. This creates an artificial shortage. So what we're seeing, and this is from wolfstreet.com, you're going to be interviewing Wolf Richter in the second half. So I thought I would give him the honor of us talking about one of his headlines. And so we're going to go over the charts, and it shows that there's been an explosion in second mortgages on second properties, essentially. So there's a growth in speculation.
And in China, of course, they're building those ghost cities, in anticipation of growth. And they grew into them. And they built the ghost transportation system, and they grew into it. And then here in the U.S., what we're having are these ghost estates, ghost houses, ghost cities, as you have the economy contracting and people are anticipating a collapse in the fiat money, the U.S. dollar. So they're trying to protect against that by putting cash to work in something that they think will move up. We see this all the time in Venezuela and other countries that are suffering from hyperinflation. There's a mad rush into trying to front run all that money printing and as a way to preserve wealth. And in the U.S., you have another very sticky problem, and this is true around the world too, is that gold, the price of gold is not allowed to seek its market price, right? You have a complete breakdown in price discovery. So you have houses going up, you have Bitcoin obviously going up, and other collectibles going up, baseball cards. I saw a Game Boy from the 1980s, complete in its sealed package, recently auctioned off for $600,000. Okay, that was originally retailed for probably less than $20.
Yeah, I had one of those. I wish I had left it unopened and could sell it now. But before I go on, while I was reading that headline, did you undo your bow tie?
Yeah, I had to because it was choking me. And I averted tears from getting a seizure of coughing successfully because at the end of the day, I am the consummate professional.
Right. Well, if that's from the 1980s, again, you could sell it along with a Game Boy, perhaps.
This is from the 1980s, and I was working on Wall Street. I often wore a bow tie. This is vintage 1980s bow tie. And I have a few of those still hanging in my wardrobe, and I like to wear them occasionally to bring back that Gordon Gekko feel.
Well, apparently it could be selling for quite a lot. But again, going back into this story about the surge of mortgages for second homes, is that we reported recently on the record margin debt in the stock markets. Here is a great way to margin up even harder, where you can earn even more, especially in places like California or outside of New York and stuff like that, where house prices are rising rapidly. The total number of, according to Wolf Richter, is that a share of purchase mortgage applications in February for second homes and investment property has soared to 14.1% of the total purchase mortgage applications, according to data by the Mortgage Bankers Association, cited and charted by the Wall Street Journal. So here it is on a chart going back to 2010. As you see, a huge explosion in the number of people buying second homes.
Right. It is like the game Monopoly. Once you have a certain critical number of homes, you basically win the game of Monopoly. And you get that privilege in Monopoly from rolling the dice in ways that you land on the desirable homes. And you're also drawing from the community bank free money a lot of times. You go around Go and you collect $200 free, that's free money. That's like universal basic income or modern monetary theory. And it just happens to go into the hands of a few who then use their monopoly position to bleed the rest of the players into bankruptcy, right? There's only one winner in Monopoly. Everyone else essentially goes bankrupt. There's no second place. So that's similar to what's happening in the U.S. People are just using the free money. This is a Cantillon effect, of course. They're getting monopoly positions in the economy, and they're bleeding everyone else to death. And they're doing so with extreme prejudice. They're doing so in a way that shows a kind of prejudice that is beyond that we normally encounter from day to day. This is more of a systemic, draconian evisceration of the middle class by a few.
One point to make is that this monopoly game is, keeps everybody at the table, all good participants in the economy, and the government is the House, really, the Treasury, the Fed. So to keep the game going, they often wipe out huge amounts of debt, like the student debt, that they look like they're going to wipe that out, favoring some players in the game more than others. And, house price speculators are usually favored over most other people in the economy. Obviously, bankers are number one, but if you're going to be in the game of monopoly, you as a house owner or multiple house owner tend to have more power with your elected officials. So especially now, if you look at, we've commented on the fact that the government basically underwrites almost everything. Over 50% of healthcare in America is actually paid for by the government, i.e. Medicare or Medicaid. Student debt is probably going to be wiped out. So all those administrators got to collect hundreds of thousands of dollars of salaries per year as basically glorified government officials now, because if the government wipes out all the debt for these student loans, then, those administrators of these universities got to be very highly paid government officials. Now you have, with the mortgages, and remember, the U.S. government taxpayer basically underwrites most mortgages through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. So they're also underwriting these people getting to speculate or willing to speculate on second properties. Because, you put down $50,000 on a $500,000 home, you could possibly gain $100,000 in equity a year with the house price gains as everybody gets in on this taxpayer underwritten speculative scheme. So the government has, of course, been subsidizing these mortgages for second homes and investment properties, but Fannie and Freddie are now beginning to impose restrictions in terms of how many of these mortgages they buy from lenders. Going forward, they will limit these types of mortgages to 7% of the dollar amount of their overall purchases. Freddie has already imposed the 7% limit, and Fannie has given lenders until June 1st to comply, according to FHA officials cited by the Wall Street Journal.
Right. So the ecosystem of fraud, I guess you could call it, because Fannie Mae and Sallie Mae, which are government lending into the student market, are not true government entities. They are private banks. And this is a bailout. This is another bailout of the private banking sector. It's not really a government agency. And it's great to have lobbyists that you can go to Washington and get laws passed and laws written to allow for the subsidization. What am
Ever
I
since
getting
you
wrong?
took off, you unplugged
no
your
more.
bow tie.
Subsidization.
Subsidization.
Is that a word?
So, yes.
Oh, fantastic. Anyway, due to that event, you've got a complete undermining of what would consider to be the rule of law. Let's call it that, or at least a moral.
Well, I think you get, using the game of Monopoly is a good way because, you cheat at Monopoly, right? You're playing with your brothers and sisters and cousins.
Oh,
and
I don't
family.
cheat at Monopoly. You cheat at Monopoly?
I used to. You tried to, right? Like that was the thing. It's like as soon as your sister had to get up to go to the bathroom, you would take a few,
No, I never did that. Well, in America, I know the dice are loaded. And if you are of a certain ilk, you end up getting a better result.
Right. Does that mean your brothers and sisters were cheating you and you felt like the dice were loaded against you? But, the point is that with this that the government is underwriting this thing, and in terms of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they were government-sponsored entities. Remember, that was the big thing in the 2008 crisis, triggered by the subprime mortgage meltdown. So the government kept on coming out and saying, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are not backed by the government. They're not backed by the government. We guarantee you this. And of course, what happened? They ended up being backed by the government. So since 2008 and the meltdown, they are mostly because of China. Again, we're mimicking China. We're a reflection of China. China owned huge quantities of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac bonds. So they essentially owned a lot of the mortgages in the United States. So we had to step in, I believe, during that time in order to rescue that relationship and continue China buying our bonds and sponsoring this entity, because there was a huge conflict with overseas investors.
Yeah. I mean, what you end up with is this insidious relationship between those getting bailed out, those taking out the loans, those printing the money. Is it a government? Is it not? And somehow it always ends up in the same result, that the top 1/10 of 1% just get another bailout, continuously rolling bailout every year, and everyone else is getting defrauded and bankrupted, no matter how they position it or what language they use or how they construct their Ponzi fraud. The result is always the same. So that's it. And the dice are loaded.
Well, in this situation here, as wolfstreet.com points out, of course, the housing market, the property market is very illiquid when things go wrong. As soon as the psychology changes and people don't think they could start flipping these homes and earning free money, it's very hard to offload one home, let alone two homes. So you have all of those taxes, the insurance, all the costs of maintaining the property. It's a depreciating asset, essentially. It costs so much to maintain. So all of those costs, that once that goes wrong, it will probably go horribly wrong.
Right. It's a Roach Motel. Essentially, it's Monopoly played with the Roach Motels. Every space on the board is just a bigger Roach Motel. And the dice are loaded, and it encourages speculation, and people are plowing all their fiat paper money. And by the way, when Monopoly came out in the 30s, the game, the original paper money from the original game is actually held its value better than the U.S. dollar. The actual U.S. dollar money, original Monopoly money, which is ostensibly worthless pieces of paper, but as a collectible, it's worth more than the dollars it's supposed to represent. So that gives you an idea of what happens to fiat money. Every single one in history has gone to zero or lost 99% of its purchasing power. So we know that the dollar, the yen, the euro. Anyway, we're going to take a break. When we come back, much more coming your way. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to Wolf Richter of WolfStreet.com. One of the best market analysts on the web. You should check him out. Wolf, welcome back.
My pleasure, Max.
All right. Now, the Biden administration just passed a $1.9 trillion package. It's now planning a $2.3 trillion infrastructure plan, another $2 trillion in stimulus, and to wipe out $1 trillion of student debt. How's this all going to work out? It's going to be okay?
Yeah, so we just passed $28 trillion, the national debt of the United States. $28 trillion is, that's up by $4.3 trillion from a year ago. So now we're looking at another, $5 trillion in a year or two to add to this debt. So far, it's been okay, so far, so good. But it is starting to be a huge pile of debt. And, the issue is, what are we going to do with it in the future? So far, so good means right now we're okay. Obviously, the yields are pretty low. The central bank, the Fed, is controlling that, can control it at this point. But, we're in the experimental land here.
Michael Burry, who did that story about The Big Short, he was The Big Short. They made a movie about it by going short the subprime market in 2008. He's coming out very aggressively, suggesting we're heading to a Weimar Germany type of hyperinflation based on all this money printing. What do you think?
Well, the signs of inflation are now everywhere, and there are increasingly bizarre signs of inflation that I haven't seen before, with some really erratic price increases in different things. Um, yeah, hyperinflation uh, is something huge, and I don't know that we're headed that way, but massive inflation of 8, 10%, even 6% would be very disruptive. We don't even have to have 1,000% inflation, for this to be a problem. With inflation, I think the issue is when and how will the Fed start attacking it, and when the Fed does start attacking it, there will be some major consequences for the markets all around. Um, the signs of inflation are just no longer ignorable. They're just everywhere. They're in the pipeline. They're right in front of us. They're building up in services. They're building up in manufacturing. Yeah, we have them on the retail side. So we no longer can say that inflation is somehow below target. I mean, it may be below the Fed's target because of the inflation measures. But when you look at reality, it is massive.
Yeah, earlier we covered your article about the explosive surge in mortgages for second homes. It would appear that American individuals and companies are levering up faster than the government. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I don't know which is faster, but the corporate sector is definitely levering up dramatically. And home buyers, so this could be institutional home buyers, they're levering up too. So there's leverage now getting built into the economy at all levels. We've seen enormous amount of leverage in the stock market. So, I mean, that's what cheap money does. Cheap and plentiful money, you get leverage, and that's the issue we now have.
So let me ask you this. Do you have this enormous split between the upper wealthiest, and you have a growing permanent underclass? Poverty is rising, mortality rates are crashing, infant mortality is rising, and house prices are now up dramatically. People can't afford housing, they can't afford education, they can't afford healthcare. So if you have this barbell approach where you've got a concentration of wealth at the very top, while at the bottom you have a draining out, a kind of a bleeding out of all the economic activity, and the middle class is disappearing. Can you therefore say, well, inflation is running at 1 or 2%? Because somewhere in the middle, between hyper rich and the new poverty, yeah, you could say inflation's at 1 or 2%. And they can say that doesn't make any difference, as long as you don't consider the fact that you're creating 150 million zombies in America, the walking dead, right? I mean, that's how they get that inflation number of 1 to 2%. They just figure that the zombies, forget the zombies, it's at 1 or 2%. Is that how they come to that number?
Well, one of the reasons they come up with that number is because they don't include home prices. So what they include is a rent factor, and that's about 2/3 or 1/3 of the CPI. And rents can't go up as much because consumers can't pay for it. So they're kind of sticky, and home prices have been soaring, and they're not included in CPI. There's lots of other reasons why our inflation measures are so low. I track one myself, which I call the F-150 and Camry price index, which tracks the prices of these vehicles going back to the late 1980s on a yearly basis. And they have blown out. Pickup trucks have gotten incredibly expensive, and we have a sub-index for CPI for new vehicles that has barely budged over the last 10 years or 20 years. It's hardly even gone up at all. So they use what's called hedonic price adjustments, quality adjustments, and all kinds of other measures to bring down the actual price increases in the vehicles. And the vehicle is a big purchase. That's a big budget item that people engage in every few years. And they have just soared. And it's showing up again this year. It's showing up in used vehicles, showing up in new. And so these price increases, they're real. People get hit with them. They're being pushed out of the market because of those price increases, but they're not showing up in our measures. So when we talk about inflation 1 or 2%, it excludes all these things. So it's not picking them up.
Right. So they're not used. They don't include automobile, even though the prices are skyrocketing. They're not including housing. Even the prices are skyrocketing. Many would argue, and myself being one of them, is that the reason to lie and use sophistry to talk about 1% to 2% inflation is to keep interest rates low, so that when a hedge fund blows up, like we just had last week, another huge multi-billion-dollar hedge fund blew up, and they just basically were able to quickly bail them out very, very quickly because the cost of money is zero. Right? So, I mean, is that why they lie? Just to bail out these hedge fund guys? Is that the reason for the lie, you think?
Well, I think there are systematic reasons that started decades ago to understate CPI, including all the CPI-adjusted pension plans, such as Social Security and other things. This is one way of bringing down these cost of living adjustments is to systematically understate CPI. And yes, if you understate inflation, you overstate automatically inflation-adjusted GDP and some other things, so it makes the economy look better. And so there's lots of reasons for doing that.
Sticking on autos, because you do have a extensive background in auto and analyzing autos. The auto manufacturers are shutting down production at the moment due to a chip shortage. I just saw a story recently where they're shipping the cars and say, we're going to add the chips later. So, I don't know how that's going to work, but that's what they're doing. It's another extraordinary event, which in normal times would probably cause market turmoil, but things just keep going. What's your take on this?
The semiconductor shortage is real, and it's a real problem. And one of the drivers behind it is that we had the sudden boom in durable goods sales in the United States and other countries too, when people got blocked from spending money on services such as vacations and cruises and restaurants and other things, and they ended up buying durable goods with their money, and they sat at home and they spruced up the home and they bought new vehicles and they got the stimulus monies and all these other things. So we had this historic spike in durable goods sales in the United States. And nobody expected it. Manufacturers weren't ready for it. So this goes up the supply chain. There's all kinds of problems in shipping now. It's hard to get a container from Asia to the United States because of all the issues. And so the semiconductors were just caught right in that. And, the manufacturers have been ordering these chips for their products. And chips on everything. They're in toasters, cars or computers on wheels. There is a chip in every little thing in your car. I mean, even if you open the lid of your trunk, that involves a chip these days. So, you just miss one little bitty chip somewhere and you can't finish the car. The whole plant has to shut down waiting for this chip to arrive. And this has hit the car industry particularly hard because, they pride themselves in the just-in-time inventory management and they're really tight supply chains. And so when these things started cropping up, nobody had any inventory. So now there's lots of plants shut down temporarily in the United States and in Japan and in Europe because of this chip shortage. Now we have, this is creeping into the dealer lots now with shortages cropping up on vehicles. We've already seen prices explode on the used vehicle side where vehicles go through auctions and are sold to used dealers. So, this is rippling now through the automotive sector, and it's pretty crazy. I've never seen anything like that.
Right. I think this falls under the heading of what's called cost push inflation. Am I right?
Yeah. So we could even have moderate demand will get inflation because of the issues we have in the supply chains.
That's interesting, this topic of inflation, because there's a lot of folks who talk about deflation and how it's technologically driven. Our friend Jeff Booth, who wrote a book, The Price of Tomorrow, talks about tech and deflation and how no matter how much money printing it goes on, you'll never make up for this deflationary trend in technology. And so deflation will always be with us. But it seems that at some point, though, the amount of money printing actually kind of breaches over the wall of that deflationary trend, and you get real inflation. How do you weigh in on this? I mean, we got about 30 seconds. How do you see that developing?
Yeah, so there was that trend with manufacturing getting more efficient and being offshore to cheap countries, and products, durable goods getting cheaper and better over time, over the years. That may have ended. Reports coming out of China are indicating that may have ended, that China is no longer exporting deflation. And that may play into this. Durable goods have just jumped in prices, and that may be a structural permanent change that we're looking at now.
All right, Wolf, we're going to have a second segment here, but thanks for this episode of the Keiser Report.
Thank you.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank our guest, Wolf Richter of wallstreet.com. Until next time, bye, y'all.